Emulation is really good, and you should do it. But why and how? Well, many reasons. Either because you want to relive your childhood again, or you're just getting bored of modern games nowadays. And in my opinion, I think 2024 is the perfect year to start emulating. You can emulate practically anything from classic consoles all the way to the 7th generation, even 8th. What even is emulation? Well, emulation is the process of mimicking the functions of one system using a different system so that the second system behaves like the first. Confusing ramble of words, I know. Usually, if you want to start emulating, you'll gravitate towards console emulators, maybe a console from your childhood, or you're just starting to try out said console. But you might also ask, is emulation legal? The legality of emulators is a very complicated topic, but I'll give you the quick rundown. Emulators themselves are legal as they just replicate the console's hardware. How you obtain games is a completely different thing. Downloading ROMs is most of the time illegal, even if you actually own the game, so most emulator developers absolutely recommend you to dump your own games, but rarely that's even questioned by the law. There are legal emulators like the services Nintendo offered, such as Virtual Console, which is completely gone, and now Switch Online's NES, SNES, and much more, which I find to be the worst online service to ever exist, and homebrew ROMs, which most emulator developers actually use so that they don't get completely nuked by Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo. Now, what are some of the advantages of emulating? Well, there's many actually. You can get better graphics like upscaling and even texture swapping. Modding your games, which via an emulator is a lot easier, and being able to access some rare titles, but emulation, even in 2024 with how far it has come, may still be inferior to the real console it's emulating. But is it only console emulators that are available? No. You can even emulate PCs. Multiple emulators like 86box, which lets you emulate 90s era computers so you can run things like the OG Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem, hell, even just use Windows 98 on it. Cheap Shaver, which lets you emulate the old PowerPC architecture to run classic macOS games, and so much more. But what about VirtualBox or VMware, you may ask? Well, these are not emulators. These are called hypervisors, which shares the current hardware with your PC instead of fully emulating its hardware. Aight, that's cool and all, but how do you actually do it? It's either drag and drop or taking a chunk out of your life just be greeted to absolute dog shit. The best way to find any kind of emulator is to use the Emulation General Wiki. You simply select the console that you want to emulate, and it will show you the best emulators for that system. It even shows if the emulator is in active development and if it's open source. In my opinion, I always recommend getting the emulators that are recommended by this wiki and if they are active. The open source part does not really matter to me unless it's a newer console that people are attempting to emulate, but if open source is your thing or you still don't really trust it, you can go through its source code, which most of the time it's on GitHub. So I downloaded the emulator. Now where can I get my games? You can either, like I said, dump your games or through other means. Once you have your games, it can depend on how you play them. Some, like I said in the first part of the vid, is just a drag and drop, or you have to go through a process to get your games running. Most emulators have a full guide on how to get your games running, so I'd recommend using those over anything else. Now, how good is the actual emulation? Well, it's a hit or miss. Either it's going to run with no problems whatsoever, having to do tweaks for a playable experience, or just downright not letting you play, even if you have the correct configuration. It also depends on its architecture and how hard it is to emulate. One example is the PS3. It used the Cell Broadband engine, a CPU architecture usually used in hospital situations. But this processor was extremely hard to work with. For some games, would perform subpar, if not worse than the Xbox 360. And it was clearly noticeable with games like GTA 4 and Fallout New Vegas, and even those games and their ports on consoles and PC are god-awful. There are games which completely push the PS3 to its limit, and how it can produce some insane visuals like The Last of Us. The fact that the RPCS3 team has gone farther than Sony has with emulating the PS3 is incredible. Another example is Xbox emulations. Xbox consoles has always been hard to emulate. Just a few years ago, the OG Xbox was decent enough to emulate, even though homebrewing the console is actually really easy. The Xbox 360, despite having an emulator with quite a bit of progress, is still extremely hard to emulate, and God knows when the Xbox One's gonna get an emulator. So it should be expected that consoles like the 360 or even the PS4, which does have a few emulators, are not going to be perfect the minute they come out. Unless it's the Switch. That became decent after about a year. Even if you have the perfect configuration, sometimes you might just have to play the game on the real console for the best experience. So that was a full-on ramble session about why you should emulate. in conclusion, I think emulation is good because of game preservation. If emulation never existed, imagine how much of the games we play now could just vanish for good. Even though companies like Nintendo sue emulators for what they believe to be piracy, they don't really understand the impact they put on stuff like this. And this is why I wanted to make this video, so average people like you and me can do emulation at any time. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Anyways, I'll see you guys all in the next month or two. See you.